African Media Initiative's business blog discusses topics pertinent to media businesses on the African continent with business leaders and thought leaders to look at trends, identify opportunities, and examine possible solutions to the many challenges facing media organizations as they try to navigate today's rapidly changing media landscape. In today's discussion, Joe Otin, Managing Director of Media CT Pan-Africa of IPSOS, talks about the importance of market data in making business decisions, the implications of increased urbanization on consumer spending, and offers perspectives on the future of advertising.
No, there hasn't, because radio, it reaches everybody. Radio does not necessarily need electricity. Now, if you look at Africa, Africa has about 14% of African households have electricity. In Kenya, the number is at about 29.3% of the households have electricity. And if you look at the television ownership, you find that those television ownership numbers are so closely associated with the access to electricity levels. And so really, if you give people power, give them electricity, they will have televisions. You can go to the poorest areas in Nairobi, and one of the things that you will notice is that there will be television sets in every home, as long as there's electricity. Where there's no electricity, then you find there's no television. Now, radio, on the other hand, doesn't rely on electricity. It relies on batteries and that kind of thing. So generally tends to be able to has penetrated most of Africa. You're looking at levels of about 90 to 97%, are very, very universal. And radio has also become a lot more local, with using local languages, being very regionalized and providing news that is very close to the listeners and the audiences. So that's the reason why radio is quite strong. And it's not going to be cannibalized by digital until we start to see better access to electricity across the board, until you start to see increased literacy rates, and increased computer, being digital savvy, using computers and that kind of thing. Okay, well, I think when you look at radio right now, has got about 97% viewing levels. Television is probably at about 50%, and print is down to about 20%. Now, internet, on the other hand, we see for the past 7 days that about 18% of the population, the Kenyan population, has had access to the internet. Those numbers would shift if you're looking at Uganda, then the numbers are slightly lower, and the numbers are tremendously lower in Tanzania. And the reason for that is there's quite a number of things. That internet tends to be urban, the internet tends to be upmarket, the internet tends to be male skewed for one reason or another. And when you look at the numbers around the urban areas and the levels of poverty, you then understand why the internet's levels are only at about 18% at the moment. It has been growing, because 2 years ago it was at about 9% for the past 7 days. Past 7 days access to the internet, and it's growing mainly because of the access to smartphones. We're seeing quite a bit of that, and certain government projects to be able to that want to ensure that people have more access to computers. Now, interesting thing, the levels of access to the internet through cyber cafes, internet cafes, is dropping. And what I've also seen from my own personal observation is that I see a number of these internet cafes actually shutting down. And this was something that we had envisioned or envisaged a few years ago, where we could see that the rise of mobile phones and smartphones was actually going to cannibalize on the cyber cafes. So generally there's a growth in the internet. It's a bit slower than what we actually expected, but for the reasons, economic reasons, and other development reasons across the board. So, but we're expecting to see some growth in that. It has. It has, and it's mainly because of um, the, like I said, the internet penetration isn't that high. It's only at about 18%. So far, we're still seeing that Nation Media has informed us that they're seeing an increase in sales of their newspaper, the Daily Nation. And what we are also seeing from the numbers is generally very stable readership numbers. So it's not being encroached on. The internet hasn't started to encroach on them. But one of the things that we're seeing from most media is that they are moving into online strategies, being able to provide them their news online and through smartphones and through apps. And I think this is certainly in preparation for a point when majority of of readers across the country, or majority of audiences across the country, are accessing the internet and accessing the news on the internet. We expect to see that there will be increased consumer spending. And when you look at the consumer index that's been published around the most African countries, we're beginning to see an increase in those consumer indexes. So money is, they are spending more, there's more disposable money, more disposable incomes, and there's more consumer spending increasing, especially with urbanization. And with the urbanization, there's more access to goods and services, more access to different types of brands, and there's also quite a push to that consumerism, and people spending money on things that they don't necessarily need, but things that they want. So we expect to see that increasing, and with that increase, there's also an increase in competition. So, for example, if you look at the retail scene today, the retail scene is very different in Kenya than it was 10 years ago, with a lot more local brands, local retail brands coming up and competing fiercely for the same types of customers. There is segmentation that's taking place as well. And this competition increases the amount of advertising that we're seeing, and that's one of the reasons why advertising has been growing over 30% for the last 4 or 5 years, growing over 30% per annum. So we expect to continue to see strong advertising growth across all the different mediums. Well, I think the number one is that we will see a segmentation of content. There is a lot of content that has a lot of potential in Kenya specifically, but is not being. We don't have the genres are not being aired and they're not being broadcast. So I expect to see quite a lot of new content coming up, and this content will be will perform differently in various ways, or there'll be varied performance depending on how well they're produced, depending on how the content is able to connect with the audiences. So we expect to see changing patterns in terms of viewership, viewership of different content. Some of the content that is aired a lot right now and still has a lot of potential is the local dramas, the local soap operas, and the telenovelas, the Filipino and Latino telenovelas. I think those they still seem to have quite a bit of potential, and they're being watched by families across the country. What we also see there is potential for is content like sports content. There's not very much of sports content at the moment in the local television, but we expect to see more of that coming with the explosion of more channels. And it also seems to have quite a bit of potential. We also see that comedy content has potential, and I think that we will start to see more comedy content coming on board. And I think there's also talk shows and entertainment talk shows. There is possibility of increasing that. One of the interesting things, though, is that when it comes to children's programming seems to be relatively stagnant, and I think the reason for that is that most of the kids will be playing outside because our weather is really great, our weather is really good. So children programming doesn't seem to be having that much of a dent. and doesn't seem to have that much potential when we look at the numbers.